The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Why do I have to read transposing instruments? Why can't publishers and orchestrators simply score in concert pitch? Furthermore, why don't all instruments just read and play in C, and then adjust how that fits their instruments accordingly?
I've addressed this topic somewhat in 100 orchestration tips, in my tips on winds. But let's work backwards from the last question. Let's assume a wind instrument tuned in concert C, like an oboe. The player will learn to strongly, very strongly, associate different regions in the treble staff with certain registers, fingerings, and embouchure adjustments for overblowing. Now let that player pick up another member of the oboe family, say the oboe d'amore. If the player attempts to read in C, then all those instincts developed by associations in the staff are thrown out the window, and the player basically has to relearn everything. Every time they pick up another auxiliary, the same story is true. Rather than playing three aspects of the same approach, they're truly playing separate instruments with an entirely different look to everything. For another example, let's look at the French horn. As I cover in Tip 28 of 100 orchestration tips, the original natural horn could only play a limited range of notes over the harmonic series. To change keys, the Baroque and classical hornist used crooks to change the length of tubing. Eventually, the two best-sounding lengths of F and B flat were combined with valves into the chromatic double horn that almost all players use today, reading in the key of F. But what if they had to read all of their parts in C? The result would be what you see in a C score. Notes hanging below the staff with so many ledger lines that the part would be better off written in alto clef. And, indeed, such concert pitch scoring is often in bass clef. A further point here is that many players in orchestras and concert or marching bands change instruments frequently. Not only that, but classroom teachers and band leaders often must have a passing level of competency on many of these instruments. Imagine the chaos if every instrument had a different set of assumptions built into its reading and playing, all to suit people who dictate that everything must be read and written in C. No one would want to play an auxiliary instrument, because the further the difference between the reading and the key of the instrument, the less things would seem to make sense. How much easier on everyone involved just to transpose their parts, knowing that the notes that they read will have the same fingering no matter what version of the instrument they're playing, or what tuning they're in. Once that's established, I want to see what they see, and score for the way that they perceive a phrase should flow across the staff. I'll know how things sound and play, no matter which version of a trumpet I'm scoring, which register is going to be used in what way, and how it's going to affect the player. If I had to score everything in C, it would force me to do far more mental mathematics than just reading in B flat or D or whatever. So finally, why do you have to read transposing? So that you can compose for the appreciation of those musicians who already have a system that works fantastically well. So get to it.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss with a few more words about transposing instruments.
This is a timely video topic for me to be presenting this month, as I'm just finishing up scripting and shooting the very last chapters of my next audio-visual course on Mac Pro Video, Orchestration 103, Wind Instruments, which has taken a huge amount of time to organize and edit. To be perfectly clear about it, when orchestrators talk about modern orchestral transposing instruments in different keys, we're really just discussing woodwind and brass instruments. I was raised as a pianist, just like many other composers. To us, the grand staff is like a landscape covering the position of every key from low G to high F, with ledger lines and ottava lines to help us read the very lowest and highest notes on the piano. Every written note corresponds with an actual sound in concert pitch. What's really hard to understand for pianist composers at first is that for woodwind and brass players, even those whose music is scored in C, a staff is really just a grid whose notes correspond to fingerings and overblowings. For instance, clarinetists who work for years trying to smooth over the break between written A sharp and B in the middle of their treble staff aren't going to want to read that break in a different place when they pick up different models, like a B-flat clarinet, an A clarinet, or an E-flat, or a bass clarinet. So forcing all players on every instrument everywhere to read actual concert pitch is a total non-starter. That doesn't mean you can't score in concert pitch. C scores are used quite commonly in some genres, especially film scoring. Some countries and composers have even normalized C scores to a degree. If that trend is useful in certain situations, then I'm all for it. But to understand the vast repertoire of orchestral scores that have been composed and published over the past 300 years, a composer really must learn to transpose at sight. This is just an acquired skill like any other, which involves mentally offsetting the notes you read to represent pitches that are higher or lower. Earlier in the video, I referred to a video tip that could prove very useful in transposing natural brass, and I recommend checking it out. I also released the B-flat transposition course for anyone on YouTube to study, which is an excerpt from Orchestration 102, the wind section. If you really want to be a competent score reader, then you should at least understand how to transpose on the keys of B-flat and F. That will cover the B-flat clarinet, bass clarinet, and double B-flat contrabass clarinet, the soprano, tenor, and bass saxophones, the B-flat trumpet and the piccolo trumpet, numerous band instruments, plus the French horn, the English horn, and the basset horn. Then you can add transpositions in the key of A for both the A clarinet and the oboe d'amore, and in the key of E-flat for reading the E-flat sopranino clarinet and saxophone, the alto clarinet and the alto sax, the baritone and contrabass saxophones, numerous additional band instruments, and the bass trumpet. D-transposition is useful for high clarinet and trumpet models as well, and G-transposition works for alto flute. It can actually be fun after a while to add one transposition after another to your mental toolkit, and be able to absorb more and more information on a sprawling page of orchestral music. I've been reading transpositions fluently for most of my life as a composer, but it didn't happen overnight. I started by learning B-flat and F so that I could understand the clarinet and horn parts in classical symphonies. Then I started studying the rite of spring, and that was a whole new level of score reading. But if I could learn to read all those transpositions, then so can you, with a lot of practice. After a while, it goes beyond just reading a transposed part off of a page and understanding what it means. You can also learn to write very naturally in transposing pitches, and even just think in those pitches when you're internalizing music, which is why it can be so irritating for a well-trained score reader to read a score in C. I hope to release Orchestration 103, Wind Instruments, sometime in early 2018. In the meantime, for more tips about woodwinds, visit the Orchestration Online website and search on the topic, or check out my book, 100 Orchestration Tips. Thanks everyone for watching and supporting the Orchestration Online channel in 2017. See you next year.